and welcome to a Modern Sales Pros event. I'm super excited to get started, but before we get started, I'll let folks trickle in and we'll start things off with a fun little icebreaker. Even though majority of us are working remotely, I always like to know where our panelists kind of get their food order or if they have a go-to lunch, because I always need some inspiration for my lunch idea. So how about we kick things off with Sarah? What is your go-to lunch these days?
Well, these days, I'd say, as boring as it is, mostly leftovers because I hate seeing food go to waste. Much different than when I used to work downtown in the office. I'd go for one of those big Kardashian-esque salads with just everything toppled into it. So a little different now than it used to be.
And you shake it like this.
Yeah, maybe never ending.
How about you, Jordan? What's your go-to lunch these days?
Creature of habit. So at home, I pretty much every day have peanut butter jelly sandwich and salad. So it's just like consistency. I don't have to think about it. But back in the days of being in the office, there's this place. I don't know if it's New York specific or if it's elsewhere, but a chain called Cava, which is basically a Mediterranean version of Chipotle, like kind of the same general concept of bowls. So that's my go-to when I'm in the office.
Nice. And Andrew, what's your go-to?
Does excessive amounts of coffee count? Like that's pretty much. I think I just finished like my sixth cup. So yeah, no, it's generally. I'm the same. I'm a creature of habit. I need like, it's either coffee or it's a protein shake, and that's it. It's like the same thing every day. It's super boring. I haven't worked in an office. I was just telling the rest of the panel in a couple of years. So I've been kind of on that kick for probably 3 or 4 years now. So I like to keep it boring.
Nice. Do you drink strictly black coffee or do you put some sort of like creamer or like syrup in there?
I like either black coffee or I like paleo coffee, which is like basically coffee and butter, which may sound disgusting, but it's actually delicious. And so I try to limit that. But yeah, I'm a huge coffee nerd, so it's like one of 3 or 4 different types of coffee that I'm generally having about now.
Very neat. I definitely heard of the bulletproof coffee you're talking about, and that does make sense. It does suppress your appetite throughout, but you get so much energy
Yeah.
that kind of leads you all the way to dinner time. But my go-to, at least lately, has been sushi. I'm over on the West Coast, and I moved from the East Coast to Vancouver a couple months ago, and the seafood sushi culture here is really, really great. So that has been my go-to lunch order these days. But thank you for sharing. I definitely have wrote down my ideas for lunch today. So let's get started. We're on this topic, go for growth, the tie between commission structure and revenue growth. But before we begin, I'll say a few words about the team at Modern Sales Pros. Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica, and I'm one of the community event managers at MSP. And for those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations and enablement, aka our modern sales pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they may not know about. We do this through live sessions like the one you're at today. We have an online robust forum, and we have our quarterly summits, which we have one next week, which I'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide. And we're starting to get back into in-person events. So if you were part of our New York and San Francisco event last week, really great to meet you. And we're hopefully going to have more in-person events soon to a city near you. So stay tuned for that. And if you're not already part of MSP, you'll be invited to join right after this event. And speaking of our summit, starting next week, April 18th to the 20th, our Supercharged Revenue Excellence Summit. We have over 20 plus events with about 5,000 modern sales pros in attendance, about 65 high caliber speakers. You'll hear from leaders in sales law, outreach, Gainsight, Stage 2 Capital, plus so much more. And so we don't want you to miss out. Sign up today. We will drop the link in the chat here and to get your free pass. And some few housekeeping notes for today's event. This event is being recorded, so if you have a friend or colleague who couldn't make it, the recording, key takeaways, and any articles or blog posts mentioned on this call will be made available on the previous event MSP page before the end of the day. And if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the top right-hand corner or leverage the chat, and we'll be sure to get them live during the event. And this event wouldn't be made possible without our sponsor today, Palette. Easily create and maintain efficient compensation plans built for your growth. No more spreadsheets, no more headaches. Motivate your sales team thanks to clear goals and immediate rewards. Palette's sales compensation software helps you calculate commissions automatically and track performance and quota achievement at scale. I'm going to drop your link in the chat. Definitely check them out. They're doing awesome things. Now, enough about me and MSP. I'm going to pass it off to Jordan, who will be moderating today's session. He'll introduce himself, and each of the panelists will introduce themselves, and then I'll come back for closing remarks. Jordan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angelica. Thanks for having myself and the panel. So my name's Jordan. I'm the Director of Revenue Operations at a company called Candid, which does kind of an orthodontic technology solution for clear aligners. I've been with the company for about 5 years in a variety of roles. I've done everything from customer operations, building out headquarters, starting our new B2B product, and now kind of focusing on the revenue and sales side. So it's been a great journey. I've done a lot of things, worn a lot of hats, which has definitely given me some nice perspective and compassion with each of the different departments in various companies. So that's myself. I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Yeah, hello. My name is Sarah. I'm the VP of Sales at Palette. Angelica gave a great introduction to us. We are a sales commission automation platform. I have spent the last about 8 years of my life joining early stage companies, early stage startups, really focusing on building and scaling their sales and post-sales organizations. And I have been at Palette now for about 10 months. So it's been a great journey so far. And passing it over to Andrew.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Morton. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at UserVoice. I started here about two and a half years ago as the incoming VP of Sales and transitioned about a year ago to the Chief Revenue Officer role. UserVoice is a company that's designed to help product teams prioritize and close the loop with their customers at scale. Or prioritize their feedback and close the loop with their customers at scale, I should say. Prior to coming to UserVoice, I was with a company called iCabby that did operations and transportation logistics software throughout a bunch of different countries, UK primarily. Excited to be here. This is, I think, the second or third MSP event that I've done, and they're always incredible. And we've got a really, really cool panel today. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So we will get started here. I'm going to start off with a question for both of you, and it's a little, very, very high level. But what role does commission play in your organization? If you had to give a 2-minute summary, I kind of want to know, how do you conceive of commission and its purpose? We'll start with, since she's unmuted, we'll go to Sarah first.
Sure. I think commissions really play 3 main roles within our organization and, of course, with our customers' organizations. The 3 is it's going to align your teams. The second one is it's going to build trust among your sellers, among your commissionable reps. And then the third is really it's going to act as a motivator and incentivizer. So in terms of aligning, what I mean by that is what it's going to do is it's going to align your sellers to achieve really what's been decided on at the leadership level of importance of your main goals. So it aligns upwards. And then it also is going to align your sellers with the people they work with. Your whole company is going to be moving in the same direction. If you build plans that are complementary to each other, it really aligns the activities that they're doing every day. And then it's also, in terms of alignment, going to cut out those, I'd say, distractions or any behaviors that could potentially hurt the company. What I mean by that is often sellers can use commission plans to gamify the way they can make commissions. And so a well-built commission plan will keep them focused and cut out distractions. In terms of building trust, it's going to help them build trust with the company, with the CEO, with their manager. A well-built, well-operationalized commission plan is going to allow them to trust that they are being paid fairly and accurately. And then, of course, it's going to motivate them to be top performers if it's built properly.
I love that. It's always nice to have kind of a structured approach. Andrew, what about you in your CRO role? What does commission play in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Sarah, you touched on a lot of great points there. So I would agree with all of those things. I particularly like the point about trust. I've often said in the past, like, I feel this may sound a little bit crazy, but I think we're somewhat fortunate in sales because it's like the key metrics, the benchmarks, how we're compensated. It's kind of a clear thing, right? And now it can get complex on the back end, et cetera. There's a lot of structure relative to commissions, but it's just like we kind of have this transparent evaluation process. And so I've always done that. But again, I'll echo Sarah's sentiments. When I think about commission, it's really one tool in a broader tool set of motivation tools to create selling behaviors around basically key selling tasks within an organization. And those tasks roll up into broader objectives that we have that are strategically important, that are going to help us get to where we need to go as a business. And I think it's interesting because oftentimes we think about commissions relative to the sales team, but it's more broadly applicable to the entire GTM group within an organization, or really any part of the organization, right? It can touch on so many different pieces because it should be seen as a tool within this, like I said, this broader toolkit of motivators. And so I think it's sort of underutilized and underleveraged today. But yeah, like I said, when we think about it, it's, well, how do we use this as a way to accomplish those strategic initiatives that we have and push it in parallel with these other motivators that we're using to empower our team?
I love that. It's interesting too, as you mentioned, transparency and really the visibility. And I think one thing that I've noticed is that, especially in our organization, having that structure around how you come up with commission, what is the practice, what is the purpose of it, and just being very transparent on it has definitely added that trust that you both talked about. So I love that. I love that part of it. Andrew, I want to go back to you, which is a related question to what you were saying.
Yeah.
Lots of KPIs, right, in every company, a lot of things you could goal off of. What do you, how do you determine which metric is the right one to develop commission off of?
So there's no silver bullet. I do think you mentioned kind of a problem that does tend to plague organizations, Jordan, where it's like there's a multitude of KPIs. And when we think about KPIs and strategic initiatives, it's our responsibility as an executive team to not only clearly define those, but to kind of whittle down that list to make sure we're focused on the most important things as a business. So when we're thinking about tying it to objectives of the business, I like to look at it as sort of an intersection between basically what is the prioritization from our business strategy overall, whether that's our quarterly business strategy or annual business strategy. What is a priority or top two priorities coming down from that strategy? And then at the intersection of that, what does the buying or the sales process look like? What does the customer experience look like relative to that strategy? And so in between those two things, you get your sort of selling tasks, your processes, your selling tasks around the customer experience. And so once we define what those tasks are, what that experience looks like for a buyer or for a customer, we can start to build the motions, the habits around that process. And so commissions, among other different tools that you guys have at your disposal as managers, those then can be used to motivate habits, right? The behaviors, the actions that we want our team to take relative to those behaviors. So a couple of examples of like what might be a good process versus what might be a bad process. So when I think about a good process and what an ideal scenario looks like, let's say that we're trying to approach a particular segment that is strategically important to us. Maybe it's a mid-market segment of a particular group of customers, and we want to gain more market traction in that. We need to not only look at yes, we want to improve our close rate and our win rate amongst that, but we also need to think about the lead channel, the acquisition channel through which those customers come in, and can we use those commissions to do it? So an example may be, well, we have a large representation of mid-market customers already in our portfolio. So we're going to try to leverage the success team to incite referrals, to build pipeline, and they will be incentivized to do that through commissions. It may be incentive payouts, et cetera, in addition to incenting the sales team to close more of those deals. We also need to look at not to belabor the point, I know we'll get more into this later, but when is it not a good scenario, right? So when the commission model doesn't align to buying experience, probably the clearest example I can think of is if you have a product that maybe it's not necessarily a product led, but it's very much a self-service buying process. Not to say that the sales team can't interact with that, but the relative value of any commissions coming off the back of that may not be a good fit. They may not be worthwhile. They may not be of value to the salesperson that's influencing them. So that doesn't necessarily mean that commissions are a bad motivator, but you want to think about what is the KPI that empowers that or enables that commission and is the core value for that commission. So so I think there's good and bad components, but again, really what we want to look at is like, what is the executive priority? What is the business strategy? Where are we focused? And how is that going to shape the buyer experience? And then what behaviors do we need to influence between those two?
One of the things that I've seen companies do often, and this just touches on the point that I was saying earlier in terms of maybe the wrong habits, the wrong commissions, is making the primary KPI that you're looking at, that you're commissioning off of, potentially the wrong part of the funnel, one that doesn't necessarily align with the other people that they're working with. So when I'd say it's a mistake. Of course, we are here to implement commission plans. I do a lot of consulting as well, but the way people will commission out SDRs or BDRs. So time again, I see people just giving out straight commissions towards number of calls made, number of meetings booked. And this isn't going to align the right behaviors. I think you are commissioning the wrong, too high up in the funnel. Of course, we know those activities do lead to good results, but what that's going to do, it's going to frustrate your AEs and it's going to misalign their two roles. And then they're not going to get along well. And they're not, like I said before, they're not going to be aligned and headed on the same path towards the same goals. I'm not saying don't commission these. Those are great things to do off of potentially little accelerators or spiffs or challenges, person with the most call. But I would always say for an SDR or BDR, that main KPI you want to do is either qualified opportunities or meetings attended, something a little farther down the funnel, so that it does align very well with what the AE, with what the AE's end goals are.
Yeah, I would echo too. I think there's a saying out there. I forget who coined this, but it's not all sales are created equal, right? So it's like the benchmarks, the things that I'm getting rewarded for doing, the deals that I'm incentivized for selling need to have some broader relevance to the organization. Obviously, we're having this conversation. And so to Sarah's point, it's like, well, are we influencing not only the right parts of the funnel, but the right buyers, the right prospect? Is it pushing me to go in and pursue those? And I think oftentimes that gets lost. And again, Sarah, to your point, it's like maybe I'm focusing on the wrong objective, the wrong KPI here that's providing or producing outcomes that are misaligned with that business objective. But again, I think we have to be clear from the top down. It's like, what is the most important priority for the organization? Who do we need to be selling into? Why do we want to acquire these customers? And then reporting that in a way that's clear and that's relevant to all the people involved in the process.
You both talk about, kind of balancing the process goals versus like pure revenue as kind of a KPI to build these commission structures off of. I think of, at Candid, we have a kind of a B2B2C model, right? So there's both doctors, there's patients, there's a ton of people. And so we're constantly figuring out how to incentivize the right things, but also make sure that we keep the funnel flush going forward. I'd be curious, Sarah, I'll throw this your way to start, is, how complex should one get with commission structures? Because it's really easy to have like 6 different things you're going off of, and reps spend time just trying to understand it, versus going super simple and doing something like pure revenue. I'm curious to see how you think about balancing kind of that specific but not overly complex commission structure.
Yeah, I think it's, even if I'll say you have a straightforward commission plan, you do need different mechanisms to motivate high, medium, low performers. So I'd always say, even if things seem simple, even if there's really just one thing you want to motivate, there's only a percentage of commission you want to pay for any deal, you still want to look at the different people that you have on your team and what motivates them. In terms of how complex to get, I'd say the main concern around building something too complex is how to operationalize it And then how do you keep your reps motivated by it if they don't understand it? And so for those two reasons, we tend to shy away from making it complex so it aligns with our business goals. But I think this is really where automation and visibility come in. What automation is going to do is it's going to pull directly from your data sources. So if your data is clean in your CRM and your payment processing system, it's going to automate that for you. You can throw your logic into your automation tool and it will calculate it for you. So you don't have to worry about the operationalizing portion of this. And then visibility. And I see Doug threw a question in here about this, and he says, how do we keep it simple, achievable, and really understandable for the sales associates? And this is all around visibility. We can build these very complex plans that align with our goals, but if our sales reps don't understand the ins and outs of how their activities are going to make them that money, they're not going to be motivated by this plan. So again, an automation platform is going to give them real-time visibility into the money they are making. So as soon as they close a deal, it's going to pop up on their commission. They will understand the exact logic and the rules on it. And then it's really important for your sales managers to understand it and motivate against it. So taking a look at forecasts, taking a look at how closing different deals will affect their sales commissions. Yeah. So I'd say automation can really help on both of these things.
When should you think, like, so I think you and I have talked about this a little bit before, but like, at what point does it make sense for a company to really look to automation? Do they have to be at a steady state where it's the same metrics that they're looking at each month? Does kind of automating it allow for flexibility within there as companies figure out what that right formula is for them?
When you're looking to automate, I'd say a few things. You need a defined plan. You need to be confident in your logic. If you are looking at changing it every couple of weeks or dependent on certain factors, it's just not going to work. The other main thing is, and I think the mistakes a lot of people make when going to automate, to put it simply, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data hygiene, if your data is not clean, if there's a ton of manual entries, you're typing somebody's name in differently each time. Maybe you're putting S. Silberfeld or Sarah S. And like it's just not going to work. So I'd say data hygiene is very important when you're going to automate. That being said, automation can actually motivate data hygiene as well. So as long as you have the processes in place, a really cool tool of an automation product will be your commission isn't going to show up. So you close a deal, you go onto Pallet or whatever tool you're looking, you go to find that deal, it's not there. Well, it's probably because you didn't put something in properly in your CRM. So it can kind of work both ways in that it can motivate the right behaviors. So as long as there is a clear plan and your data is consistent, I think automation can really help you a lot.
Amazing. Well, question here that I'll tag on there from Doug is, how do you, sorry, Ashley is what I meant to say. Curious to know what you all do to ensure understanding by your sales reps when it comes to commission and who is accountable for making sure that happens. So, how do you take what your structure is and make sure you're communicating it effectively to the team so that they understand it? I'll put this one to Andrew.
Yeah. So, I mean,
oh, I think you might have hit mute again.
Sorry, I'm living in fear that I'm going to have a 4-year-old run into. I have a kid home today, so I'm trying to keep it as quiet as possible in the background. No, I think it's clear and concise communication ahead of every quarter. We're documenting this out. We have a clear understanding of what factors can be controlled. What's the scale of the commission, right, relative to the overall objective? We have very clear and concise objectives relative to the business strategy. So we've broken those down and said, okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish from a growth perspective. Here are the sales targets. That's tied into not only top line revenue growth, but also we're showcasing the impact it will have on net revenue retention and our overall expansion to get the baseline up. So we're very clear about the goals and then what goals are, what impact those goals are going to have on the broader organization. Again, we've documented all of that. And generally what I'm doing with the sales team is saying, like, look, here's a presented plan. Here's couple of different scenarios where it will run out. Are we in agreement? on this, right? Because it should be an opportunity as well for, I've never been of the mindset that we should just hand down goals and here's a commission structure. Like, it's about that trust piece that Sarah talked about, right? Like, the rep needs to be confident in, hey, I'm going to be able to achieve this. I'm going to get paid out. Like, these are realistic earnings. And so getting agreements and buying off and getting a joint sign off on the commission structure before you even go into your quarter, your 6-month period, or whatever it is critically important. And talking through it, right? Just giving you an opportunity to voice concerns or ask questions, I think is hugely helpful.
I love that. One thing interesting that I've found recently, at least in our role at my company, is, we use a model a lot to kind of help us project what goals we need to aim for, especially to hit our budgets. And usually those are fairly complex and take in different assumptions and a lot going on. And what we've tried to do recently is make sure that we are really walking the team through what assumptions are being made, the high level of the model itself, so that they feel like they really understand the logic behind it. And it's definitely been helpful. So I can see both of your points on that, really, on trust, visibility, and kind of making sure that it doesn't feel like a top-down mandate and more of a joint decision. Really interesting question from Matt that I'm curious. I'm going to throw this one to Sarah. You see a lot of companies' commission structures, obviously, at Pallet. Do you see any difference in the way that companies set up their commission when it's a product versus a service?
I think potentially it's hard to say just product versus service. I think size of deal, I think the motion and how you sell it, I think it's gonna be hard for me to make a generalization on that. I'm always happy, though, to have chats, Matt. If you do want to reach out and you want to chat about what your current plans look like or any of that, I'm happy to have those discussions. I do think potentially it's hard for me to have that. You're going to be looking at margins. You're going to be looking at size of deal, quotas that your reps need to hit. And then who's selling it? Is it recurring? Are you relying on CSMs? There's so many more factors than just product versus service, unfortunately.
Yeah. To add to that, I agree with you 100%, Sarah. Like, there's a lot of nuance that goes into that, because I'm thinking about what we do today, and it's a combination of both, as I think most people are. Excuse me. One thing I think is really important, though, is that if you are going to use commission, again, as a motivator in any of these type of scenarios, is that the value has to be relative to that person who's selling it. So what I mean by that is, like, I've seen in different organizations in the past where it's very product focused, and it's like, cool, we want to use sales to drive adoption and expansion within a particular segment for this product. But the selling point for that product, the price point for that product was so low that it was like the relative value for a salesperson to come in and like actually do that was just, they're like, I don't really want to do this, not that salespeople don't want to support the business organization, but it's also like, I'm going to sell 1,000 of these deals and I'm going to make $50. It's just not going to work, right? Economically, it's not viable. So you do have to look at the cost impact, but you also have to look at what is the actual outcome relative to commission. And maybe it's not to say that commissions are off the table, but you may need to think about a different KPI to measure in that scenario, right? Like, we may want to give some additional comps for market adoption or overall uptake or net upsell, something like that. But you have to be really cautious of that when you start to look at those different commission models.
Talking a lot about kind of iteration and the importance of reevaluation. Speaking of that, I'd love to hear from both of you. We'll start with Sarah, but how often do you typically think about or recommend reevaluating your commission structure, your KPIs, in a way that, allows the revenue to grow for the company, and also kind of the reps to feel like they're getting in? And if you do change it, how do you do that without, frustrating reps who are trying to get used to what they should be focused on?
I think to Andrew's point earlier, it's never should just be top down. We're not just here to mandate anything that I implement or work on or any of that. I want buy-in from my reps. So I think that buy-in's really important to get, allowing them to see the upside, allowing them to see new opportunities, even taking a look at, hey, if we had this plan implemented last quarter, here's actually how it would have positively, hopefully positively, affected your commissions. And so getting them excited about it as well. Anytime there is an update with your business objectives, whether it's a different product you want to focus on, whether you're looking at churn becomes more important, cash flow becomes more important, you're going to want to take a look at it again. Anytime you see potentially people are not hitting quotas, we are in a tough market right now. We won't always want to keep our sellers motivated. So I do believe that you should continue to look at quota during markets like this, potentially. Anytime you see there's just a mismatch between the way people are selling and your goals. Are they gamifying it potentially in a negative way? Or are they finding opportunities to make a lot of money in areas that potentially you don't want? Or is there, like Andrew was saying before, is there an activity you really want them working on, but there's not a lot of upside for them, so they're not going to focus on it? I do think as a sales finance leader, you should be looking at this. I'm going to say quarterly, but I think it also depends on what your sales cycle looks like as well.
No, Andrew, curious to see what your thoughts are on reevaluation.
Yeah, I think you covered all did a good job of articulating all the ground rules, right? It's definitely, for me, it's like what percentage of reps or CSMs for that matter are achieving their OTE, and to what percentage of that. So it's like if they are shortcoming, to what extent are they overachieving, et cetera. Like OTE shouldn't be some lofty pie in the sky type of goal. Like OTE should be realistic earnings that a good portion of your base is actually able to achieve, right? Nobody wants to come in and be told like, hey, I'll make 6 figures and I'm pulling in a 50K salary. And it's like, you're just going to demoralize and crush your whole team. I also do think, again, I think it's a great point Sarah made about the appropriate timeline for testing these things. And so I think it's relative to the objective that you set. But again, as an example, let's say that on average, it takes you 90 days from start to finish to close a mid-market deal. And you're looking at it in 45 days and saying, well, we haven't seen any success in that. Like, your timelines need to follow your sales motions. Now you could say like, well, we want to use commissions maybe to speed up the sales cycle, and that's a different scenario. But again, like, you have to understand what is the objective and what is the relative natural business process for this. And so that'll give you the gauge of how long you want to look to take results. That said, I also think it's appropriate to test different scenarios as long as they're documented. And again, you're clear on the outcome. Like, I think that one of the shortcomings I see in organizations is that people are just too hesitant to try different, introducing new tests, new commission models. Maybe it's something for referrals, maybe it's something around retention. As long as you have buy-in from the team, and again, you've communicated the objectives really clearly, and you understand like, okay, this is really how long it should take to test these things. There's nothing wrong with trying out new scenarios. We did one recently around a referral program that we tested for 90 days, worked pretty well. We want to see if we can scale it up. We've implemented it fully. Just set the right expectations again, and be communicative with the team, and make sure that everybody is buy-in and there's understanding around this. And anytime you can offer anybody some additional monetary value, I think most people will be inclined to take it.
How do you, so as you mentioned, kind of testing different things and trying to adapt, how do you think about judging whether or not a commission structure is being successful? I mean, are you just looking at overall revenue? Are you looking at who is hitting quota? How do you think about kind of judging success in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on a couple of different things, actually. One, if we're looking at like patterns and acquisition channels, we're trying to see if there's sort of a natural proclivity to that channel. So again, maybe using the referral example again, which I'm going to beat to death on this call, maybe you see that there's like a continuous stream of referrals, or you know that former users are great advocates of your current product. And so you're like, well, let me see if I can incent this as a way to drive more lead traffic in or to close more deals. I think it's probably, you can consider it in parallel to any other motivator that you might use, right? I think, again, commission can be elevated because it's probably not considered enough. But again, are there natural things that are happening within the business that I can start to perpetuate using that as an incentive? And then again, I think it also depends on the buying experience, right? Like, what does that look like? What is the value of the customer? would a sales touch point add value to this purchasing process? I think that that's really, really critical. And again, what do those behaviors look like? Because it's like, I don't want to just inject a sales touch into a process for the sake of doing so and then trying to commission to incentivize it. If it's not relative to the actual buyer and it doesn't help the buyer experience, then I'm just going to put this out there and nobody's going to take advantage of that commission as well. So again, one, are there natural things that are happening today within the business that I think I can perpetuate by incentivizing it, and this being one of the tools with which to do so? And again, will that sales touch be relative to my buyer experience?
You both mentioned like spiffs and ways to kind of work alongside commissions to help with maybe sub or intermittent goals for different KPIs throughout a quarter, throughout a year. Great question from Doug. How do you think of implementing spiffs on top of OTE or traditional commission goals so that it doesn't distract them from kind of the baseline goal? Or, are spiffs great? We want a lot of them, fewer, none. I'm just curious to see how you think about that, Sarah.
I love spiffs. I think, like Andrew mentioned, you always want to be testing. Spiffs are a great way to test if you can have impact on certain areas without a huge disruption. So I think it's a great tool to test. It's a great tool when it's a great motivating tool. It can be a nice surprise, right? If you're halfway through the quarter, whatever that is, and people aren't hitting quota and you want to keep them motivated. And again, especially in this market where we just know reps are not, we don't have as many reps hitting quota as we used to, and we need tools to keep them motivated. And things are changing every month, I'd say. It's a great little motivator that we can pull out as well, right? We can say, and it gets them focused, it gets them excited, it gets them looking at the upside. I think he said, I'm just reading Doug's question, difficulty sustaining after the spiff or incentive ends. Well, like I said, it's a great way to test. So if you found success with this spiff, take that incentive and throw it into your plan instead of having outbound deals get a certain spiff, or the most outbound deals makes $1,000. Throw an accelerator on it in your main plan so that you have they make an extra 2% or whatever that looks like within the main plan. So if you do find it successful, it is for a reason. I do recommend putting it into your plan, and then also using them often, changing them often, taking a look at how we can focus very specific sales behaviors. I'd say you don't want them to distract ever. So make sure the upside probably isn't greater than what that main plan looks like. But it is a really fun way to gamify commission.
Andrew, I want to throw it your way too. How do you think about spiffs and layering those on top of traditional commission?
Yeah, I'd very much agree with Sarah. Like, it's a great way to test and to get some early signal that these different plans or these different structures you might be trying to implement, whether or not they're going to be successful. I do think, just like with a commission structure, it's really, really important to understand the objectives. What are we trying to achieve with this, so we can judge at the end of it whether or not the outcome worked and whether it's something that we want to keep, right? I think spiffs you'll have difficulty sustaining spiffs in the event that it's like, well, we have no objective for it, right? Again, maybe it's a one-off and it's a motivational tool, but it's like, if we don't really clearly understand what we're trying to incent with doing this, like, it'll fall off. We won't have people rally behind it. It'll be difficult for us to measure the success of it, obviously. So it's like, cool, going into this, we want to have eyes wide open. We really want to understand what we're trying to influence, and then measure out of the back of it. And yeah, I mean, we've used it. I can think of a couple of real life examples where we've used that as an initial indicator to say, yes, this can be a successful program as a standalone or not. And I mean, I think the worst case scenario is like, you introduce it, nobody takes advantage of it. Oh, well, if you do introduce it and it's successful, it's like, cool, I have something powerful there, right? It's indicating to me that like something within my comp structure is probably lacking, or there's an opportunity here that I'm not taking advantage of. And so if I am paying out more money on a one-off because of it, it's probably something I should implement in my long-term structure as part of a broader comp plan.
Awesome. Ignore the fire alarm in my building suddenly going off. So I'm back up here. I apologize. Question for you, Sarah. When we change commission structures, what is the best way to implement that as not to kind of interrupt the flow of the reps themselves?
I think we go back to buy-in, right? We want them to understand the plans at a deep level. We want them to believe that there is more opportunity here than there previously was. And we want them to expect it as well. We don't want them ever getting, if we go years at a time without changing comp plans and all of a sudden we change it, well, without warning, well, there's going to be there's going to be surprise. There's going to be disruption. I spent my last 8 years, as I mentioned, working in early stage startups where change is the normal. Anything that sticks around for too long is surprising. So I always say it's about managing expectations, giving them visibility, and so giving them an upside with the change as well. So I go back to automation. If you're not already automating and you change your plans, this is a perfect opportunity to implement an automation tool. You can build your plans directly onto your automation tool. You can build plans with some intelligence behind it because you can compare different plans and how they're going to affect your bottom line, how they're going to affect your overachievers, underachievers. And then also it gives your reps some upside of visibility. All of a sudden, they no longer have to shadow account. They no longer have to do that little calculation on the side trying to figure out what they make. But you're giving them that visibility, adding that layer of trust. So I'd say it's a great way to introduce something because there is an obvious upside to it for the reps.
I love that. As we start, obviously, in the last 10, 15 minutes of our call, would love to move. I think you both have mentioned a lot of things. If there was one takeaway on something to avoid when kind of common mistakes that people are making when they're trying to implement a successful commission structure, what is that top mistake that you want people to avoid kind of in setting that implementation? Maybe I'll start with Andrew this time.
If I had to narrow it down to one,
can be two if it must.
No, I'm like, you need to be intentional in how you set up your commission model. I know that seems a bit broad or ambiguous, but it's like, it just so often you see people throw it out and say, okay, cool. Like this is what we have budgeted for a salesperson. And so it's going to be a 60-40 split on salary versus commission. And it's like, there's nothing motivating about that. You have no understanding of whether or not that's a realistic OTE for a customer. You're going to demotivate sales teams. Like you just have to think about it with, it's much like any other revenue process or forecasting process within a business. So I think that's always a good place to start. But I think probably if I had to isolate it down to like, okay, what is the tactical action of it? I would say it's really understanding like, what are those core sales activities that we need to influence? And Sarah talked about it at the beginning of this call. Like a lot of times it's misaligned on like, am I doing a number of calls to the right person? And like, what metrics am I measuring on? So again, what we have to do to understand it is first articulate good business objectives. Then we have to really understand the buying experience relative to those objectives. Who's the consumer? How are they going to purchase the product? What does the funnel look like that they come through? And at the intersection again of those is, these are my behaviors that I want to try and build habits around. And so understanding those is critical if you want to start to like commission in a way that's really going to be meaningful.
Sarah, how about you? What's your top mistake for people to avoid?
I think it's underestimating commissions and commission plans. It is, as leaders, one of our biggest levers that we have to affect revenue. That these little changes to our commission plans can affect the type of revenue, when revenue comes in. It can have such a massive impact on the bottom line for the business. It's also a very big expense of ours. So to, I think, undermine the impact that it can make is a big mistake. Harvard Business Review has, and I think Angelica said she'd throw this in, but they have a great article. They did several studies, and one of their hypotheses was that if you removed caps, so companies that had caps on their commissions, that they thought this was having a negative impact on revenue, on performance. And so the study that they did of companies that did have those caps, that didn't have accelerators on quota achievement, they actually increased revenue by 9% that year. So like commission plans can have a real effect and a real impact on your bottom line. So like Andrew said, be thoughtful about it, be mindful about it, and use it as a tool to incentivize and use it as a tool to build trust. And I think you'll be in a good place.
I think I want to echo that point, because I think it's a really solid point that if people take away anything from this, what Sarah just said is so critical. Commissions they so often get isolated to the sales team, and it is part of the selling process. Like, don't get me wrong, like it is a core component of it, but it's like, if I can spin off commissions relative to other positions, or like improving my drive through the funnel, I feel like it's such an underutilized motivational tool. And if it's like there's an acquisition channel that exists that I can push more volume through, more revenue, more new customers that are relative to my business, why would I not be doing that? So I think just looking at it more holistically, or thinking about, if I'm in sales leadership only, like, how do I pull more of these roles within the business into it? And how do I help spread some of that around? Because it can be an additional motivator for people that are not just on the sales team, right? It's something that should be leveraged across the business.
It's interesting too to think about. We've talked a lot about the revenue side, right? Of kind of how we tie commission to make sure that the company's hitting their KPIs. Is there an industry standard, or do either of you feel like there is an ideal bell curve for commission to kind of judge success? You have X% of people exceeding it, X% of people hitting, X% below. Do you ever think about that in your kind of conception of success there? I'm curious. We'll start with Sarah on this one.
I mean, I think industry standards is 60 to 80% of your team attainment. Usually we do go by that. I'd say that's kind of the curve we're looking at. It's going to be so different though, by company, by sales cycle, by industry. But I'll say that's kind of the industry standard.
I like it. Andrew, how about you feel about 60 to 80%?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that's a good rule of thumb. I do think it is, well, I won't say that there's alternatives to it necessarily, because it is one of the key metrics that I'm looking at, right? It's like, what is the adoption? What is the likelihood that somebody's going to achieve that OTE, not just from a business goal perspective, but from an employee satisfaction perspective, right? Like, we always need to be conscious of that, but there's a lot of uncontrolled stuff, so it is variable. But I think it's also important. It's equally as important to look at, like, again, not all sales are created equal. So what kind of deals am I getting? What kind of customers am I getting? Am I keeping? There's definitely some surrounding metrics that I think are important to look at in addition to it. Like, that in isolation is, I mean, you could have reps that are blowing it out of the water, or likewise are just getting crushed and are hitting, you've got 10% of them meeting quota. And while that commission structure is probably poor, what they're aiming for is probably also not aligned to that structure as well. And so you need a broader reconsideration than, well, let me just tweak the comp plan to get this figured out, right? It can't be that in isolation.
I like that. I'm curious, Sarah, based on this, so we're talking about, like, what percentage should hit quota, or, how you judge that success. Do you find that companies that, have higher percentages based of the comp for sales reps based on commission versus base, do you see any patterns where, companies that have more focus on the base compensation perform lower, higher? I'm just curious if there's any correlation between kind of that division and success in the end.
It's not something I've dug personally too much into at this point, is how split between base and commission look like, and any trends there. I will say though, keeping the market that we're looking at in mind, you want to set your sales reps up for success. So I do believe in taking quite a bit of that accountability as the company is, in not having a disproportionately large percentage relying on commissions. But again, you're looking again back at sales cycles and size of deals, and how those can have an impact. I don't think that's something I can speak too much on those trends.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Andrew.
I think I would agree with you. Like, I think that's a highly variable thing. And I haven't necessarily seen it go one way or other, but I agree. I think what you pointed out, like, that's really important is it achievable? Like, however I break it up, and like, I think a lot of times we seem to have kind of gone past this, but like, I remember the past organizations being like, well, it's going to be heavy commission, it'll be all commission. And it's like, well, it's this completely unrealistic goal. So you have people making, again, 30% of the OTE, and you're just going to burn reps that way, right? It needs to be realistic. But I think the other thing, and this is probably industry dependent, is you need to see what kind of like talent you attract and retain based on that commission salary structure. Like, I mean, is it bringing in people that can go in and sell and that are comfortable with that split? Are you bringing in people that are like, well, I don't take this seriously because I'll never make the OTA anyways? Like, for me, that's the biggest red flag. And be like, what kind of talent does this type of compensation structure attract? And what is the outcome? Like, what is my turnover on a sales team or organization level because of this structure, right? Like, those are the lag metrics that I would be paying attention to.
I like the idea of, really kind of making it achievable, but, also kind of constantly evaluating quality of life for your reps too, to make sure you don't get too much burn there. Speaking of kind of really the rep interaction, sales team interaction, we've mentioned throughout today kind of the flow of making sure we get buy-in, right? To get the trust, to get the confidence in the plan, it's achievable, you're focusing on it. How do you consider, like, let's go to the very beginning of the funnel as kind of the final topic today, which is you're developing your, whether it be quarterly, biannually, yearly, monthly commission structure. Who do you involve in when in that process? I'm just curious and thinking about, so Sarah, for you, it like just as in Pallet's own commission structure, and you're saying with you, are you starting with some revenue operations work and then bringing something to the table for your salespeople to react to? Are you involving them first to get, kind of high level things to keep in mind as you're developing the model? I know everybody does it a little differently, so I'm just curious how you do it at each of your organizations. We can start with Sarah, since you're muted.
Sure. I mean, I think it depends where you are. Are you an early stage startup? You have a new team of SDRs that you're building out a plan for, and potentially you don't have a lot of data to work off of already, or are you adjusting the plans? I think you're, as much as possible, you want to use work with revenue operations on building out models. An automation tool like Pallet can do it for you quite easily. So we can actually compare, I said this before, but we can compare models. So if you do want to propose a new model, you can actually, maybe there's new accelerators, or you want to throw in new quotas, whatever that looks like. You can take that model and see how it's actually affected, how it would affect your bottom line, or what payouts would look like on previous performance. And you can build a business case with that, right? Look how it has affected potentially our bottom line. We've saved money. We've incentivized this very specific behavior. So we have X amount more, we would have had X amount more revenue or paid out X amount on this product line or this term. We would have motivated our overperformers and paid them out more, potentially would have paid out our underperformers a little bit less. So building a business case, I do believe, is important. But of course, top down, it comes from what are your business objectives. So I think it's often your sales and finance leaders. It's usually a little bit different at each company, but your sales and finance leaders that are getting together to build out those plans. And you're going to want to pull in the right people to give you the right data and to build that business case for.
Before I go to Andrew, a follow-up question for you based on kind of what you're saying, talking about finance, sales. Obviously, one tends to be, very, very gung-ho and front line focused. The other, typically, finance teams tend to be more conservative, focused on the budget and kind of that high line, board metrics. How do you bridge the gap between those two to make everybody feel like they're coming out in the end comfortable with commissions and kind of KPIs for your actual field team, given that you might have two opposing different approaches to that?
We see this a lot. I mean, one of the things that we advocate for, and we work with a lot, are companies that pay commissions once the invoice has been paid. So rather than unbookable revenue, and finance loves that because you're conserving cash flow. Reps don't love it because they want to make commissions when they close deals. But I mean, aligning on reasons, aligning on how this affects business objectives at the top level between sales and finance is very important. An example of that is clawbacks. Guess what? Paying commissions on after invoices have been paid are going to prevent clawbacks. Sales reps are going to love that. They hate clawbacks. Or it will also get them focused on the right behavior. So again, I think it's that executive alignment, and then pushing it down from there. Making sure that your sales leaders have a great plan as well, that they feel incentivized, is going to help them a lot in convincing their team that it's a good plan.
I love that. As a final question, then, Andrew, we'll go over to you before Angelica kind of wraps us up today. How do you think about involving different parties in the development of your commission structure and kind of along that journey?
Yeah, start early, all right? Like, get ahead of it, right? We don't want to do any of this last minute, and we do want to get as much data as we can as possible. I think Sarah articulated it well. It's like, we do need to define, and I think you can go ground up, but I think people want a defined vision and a defined objective from the executive team, something to rally around and something to align themselves with. But also we need to have clear feedback from people that are operating in the field and are selling on a day-to-day, like that's part of their role. We need the effectiveness of it, and obviously some of it's going to be biased and there's going to be subjective data in there, but it's like, how well is it working? Where could it improve? Where could it, succeed? And then I think when you're looking at growth overall, that's a combination of things. So it's gross revenue retention plus expansion plus new top line revenue. So relative to the business objectives, what levers do I want to try and pull this year? And then I think once we've sort of established those overarching objectives, it's a combination of like, what's the baseline from the gross revenue perspective? Again, what behaviors do I want to incent? And then how can I also bring some continuity to earnings with the sales team while also pushing them a little bit, right? Like, I don't think we want it to be hugely disruptive to them, like, and totally just skew the earnings. And it's like, well, you made this year and now you're falling off, and it's completely different this year. But we also want to push the team a little bit. So it's a lot of feedback from the sales teams, the success teams. It's a lot of feedback from our customers. There's got to be a partnership with finance in there to analyze historic data. Are these goals achievable? Can we perform this given how we've performed historically? And then fortunately, as like a sales leader, you get to stick yourself right in the middle of that and act as like the balancing intermediary to filter through all of that and set a course. But I think if you consider all of your sources and you listen to all of those different sources, you'll be in a stronger position to make better decisions, right? It's not easy, but you'll be in a better position to do that effectively.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate both of your time. Wanted to just say on my end, I've learned a ton that I even plan on implementing in our own commission structure here at Candid. So excited for that, and really just appreciate your expert opinions and time here. Angelica, pass it over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Jordan said, and I want to thank you, Jordan, for moderating this awesome panel, Sarah and Andrew for your expert insights, and everyone for who attending and participated and asked your awesome questions. Thank you again for attending another MSP event. Just a reminder that the recording, key takeaways, along with the articles mentioned on this call will be made available on the MSP previous event page before the end of the day. And stay tuned for our upcoming events. Will be also found on that email sent out to all the folks who attended and also registered. Thank you again for attending, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.